Hi, I'm Phil Dave. I'm the producer of the Early Breakfast Show on talkRADIO. And welcome to my makeshift studio/control room. The short answer is yes, but not in the way that you might be forgiven for thinking. We actually have found ourselves being considerably more efficient with the planning for the programme. I think that everyone is very aware that as much as we need people last minute, because of course the COVID-19 story is forever developing and chopping and changing, what is quite useful, especially on the programme that I produce, which is quite heavily business based, is that we know we are going to need people from all walks of business life as to how they have been impacted by the outbreak of the coronavirus. And therefore, it's actually leading us to do quite a lot more forward planning. And subsequently, the planning for the show has changed, but not necessarily in a bad way. The short answer is yes. We have seen, thank goodness, a considerable rise in audience figures over the time of the coronavirus outbreak. I suspect this is something to do with, of course, that people are A, stuck at home and not able to necessarily go anywhere, but B, they just want to know that they can turn to a reliable news source that actually delivers to them efficient facts and figures as to what the heck is going on with this world at the moment. And of course, although that the reasons are quite unfortunate, we are very lucky to say that yes, viewing figures have changed, and for the better. I don't know whether or not there's any one example I can give as to a story that's worked really well for the show, but what I would say is it's always that personal element. For us, it's about the individual who's prepared to come on and share their story with us of how COVID-19 has impacted on their daily life. So this could be anything from the way they run their business, in particular, that's of an interest to us as a business program, but also in terms of how maybe it's brought them closer together with either their friends or their family or even people that they've never spoken to before. That's the kind of story that really gets a reaction, and the ones that we are seeing people really relate to as well, just because I think everyone has been impacted by this in one way or another, whether they like it or not. Obviously, if you pick up a newspaper today, you will very scarcely see anything other than the coronavirus featured in that paper. And the same has got to be said for the programs that we have as well. It's not that we don't want to talk about anything else, but we have a duty to make sure that we cover all aspects of the coronavirus outbreak to the country. We are ultimately a national station, and therefore we are duty bound to make sure that we are talking about what people want to be talking about. And frankly, there's not really any other conversation in town. We do always try in some of the lighter features to include non-coronavirus based stories just to give people a small break from it, because let's be honest, it's essential that we get a little bit of respite from it wherever possible. So for us on the Early Breakfast Show, the show that I produce, what we will try and do is make sure that we have light-hearted features on the show, including news stories such as ones that we've deliberately picked out because they don't have any coronavirus featured within them. I'd say in terms of ratio, though, realistically, it's probably about 80 to 90% coronavirus. We're quite fortunate in the sense that we are a radio station ultimately, and as a result of it, it means that we don't have to worry too much about the visuals of our guests. Now, funnily enough, we do have quite good visuals in our studios. We have cameras set up and the studios have very nice backgrounds to them to ensure that we can get those social media clips, and they really do look the part when we have them. However, at the moment, many of our shows, based on not broadcasting from the studios, have had to adjust to this by either speaking to guests over the phone, which is quite common practice anyway in a radio environment, or we're speaking to them over high-speed lines such as Skype or ISDN. And it's a surprising number of people who actually have access to either Skype or ISDN are readily available to speak to us, and thankfully we stick to those guests wherever we can. The kind of content that our audiences have been responding to best so far, it would appear, are the personal stories. So these are stories that they can relate to themselves. And it's not necessarily people who have been arranged as guests through companies, such as PR companies, who often point guests our direction. No, these are more people who have phoned up the radio station off their own back. They're people who are really going through this on the ground, experiencing the really hardship that coronavirus has to offer. So this could be anything from quitting a job that they've had for many years, or worse still, actually losing the job that they've had for many years, simply because their position is no longer tenable. With that in mind, they've had to take up other roles that, frankly, they wouldn't dream of ordinarily doing. But it's those kind of stories that respond really well with our listeners, because they can understand what we're going through, they can understand what they're going through, and what the listeners are going through. Everyone, no matter which way you look at this, is impacted by it. And I think it's really a case of a story that someone listening gets and that they see in themselves. Well, if you would have told me a couple of months ago that I would be producing a national radio programme from the comfort of my own home, I would not have believed you. I didn't think it was going to be possible. It's so essential being based in a studio when you are producing any programme from radio to television that the idea of doing it remotely is just ridiculous, frankly. But as you can see, I have a studio set up behind me, and one that works reasonably well, all things considered. As a result of it, I connect each morning to the studio, where we do have one colleague who does sit in the control room operating all of what's called the output. So in other words, all of the controls and making sure that people are in the right place at the right time. And the presenter, James Max, is from his home with his own studio set up. The two of us connect up together, we communicate over a shared document to make sure that the communication is there and that I'm able to produce and direct the programme as I ordinarily would do in a studio. And as a result of it, James is given all of the information over a shared folder in a cloud drive, and subsequently, somehow, we manage a national programme on a daily basis. But that's without doubt the biggest challenge that we've faced so far. We try wherever possible not to share content for a couple of reasons. Number one, it makes the station look like it's running dry, and it's very different when you're on television. Television, it's not taken for granted that someone is watching that same station for a considerable number of time. With radio, it's very much taken for granted that people will have it on in the background throughout the day, especially now when there's not very much else that they potentially could be doing. With that in mind, we don't want to be seen as repeating content too often, because if we do that, frankly, it makes us look like we can't be bothered, which is simply not the case. My colleagues and I are working, if I say so myself, harder than ever to ensure that the content is as fresh and as up-to-date as possible. But also, it kind of makes us look like that it's a bit boring. That's just not the case at all. We don't want to repeat content if we can help it, but I would be lying if I didn't say to you that we have repeated guests from time to time simply because situation wouldn't permit anything else. So let's take, for example, that there is someone who specialises in a particular subject. With that in mind, if they are the go-to specialist and it's relevant to what's going on with the COVID-19 situation, there would be no hesitation but to get the same guest on. However, they would more than likely be asked a completely different set of questions and certainly featuring in a different programme. I'm Phil Dave. Don't forget, Early Breakfast with James Max goes out Monday to Friday between 5am and 6:30am on talkRADIO. Hopefully, we'll see you there.